What do we know about lifestyle factors and prevention of disease based on meta-analysis and pooled analysis, and then specifically on cardiovascular disease and cancer. And I'll talk in terms of lifestyle about smoking, overweight, physical activity, and dietary factors, including alcohol. And at the end, I will come back in looking what is the effect when you combine several of these factors. So, major causes of death. I suppose everybody knows this, but it's every now and then good to mention this, I think, because not everybody may realize that cancer is now the worldwide major first cause of death. It has surpassed cardiovascular disease. These are on second and third place, and then respiratory diseases and other diseases follow on a worldwide basis. This is, we're talking about, for example, 12 million cancer deaths per year, and they're on the rise. So that's one thing on what are the major causes of death. Well, in terms of cancer and cancer incidence, this is just a graph that based on age standardized rates. Could you please try and follow it here, because it's a little bit awkward to see people discuss over there. And hopefully you can manage and follow the lecture here, yeah? If it's not a problem. And otherwise maybe you can follow something else. So this is a graph showing the variation in the incidence of total cancer around the world. And here are some data on that. For example, green is less than 100 per 100,000. These are rates per 100,000. And red is more than 320. So you see that on total cancer basis, there is already a large variation around the world, with highest rates in the US, Europe, and Australia. Intermediate here in this Asian region, and low in Africa. But depending on which cancer you look at, these the ratios can be much bigger. For example, esophageal cancer or meningeal or rare cancer, it can have easily 100-fold variation around the world. So the message is big variation in disease rates around the world. This is true for cancer, for heart disease, and many other chronic diseases. Another point is that over time, these rates are also not very constant. They can change a lot. This is a graph on time trends in lung cancer mortality in a number of countries, for men here and women here. If you can't read it, again, you can come to the front. But this is from the period of 1950 to 2006. And it gives you very clearly for lung cancer, this is actually the lung cancer epidemic that we have seen and are still witnessing in countries in the world. For example, here Hungary is on the top here, but many countries, Western countries, have shown a clear epidemic. It's not a real short-term, but a long-term epidemic. And in males, it's now going down because of the decreasing smoking rates. Nevertheless, in women, it's going up because they have been trying to catch up with men and are successful in that, and therefore also, for example, lung cancer is on the rise in most of the countries here, a very deadly disease. Very good to mention, of course, is that the blue one here is China, which are both in men and women on the increase, and given that there are many Chinese, we will witness a lot of lung cancer and other diseases in Chinese in the coming ages, because the tobacco industry has been very successful in exporting cigarettes to that part of the world once the pressure got too high here. So big variation over time, very large variation. And a third piece of evidence is that very interesting studies, so-called migrant studies, where people have been studying the rates of disease in a country where migrants originally came from, the country where they went to, their so-called host country, and then follow that, for example, over generations. And it's very interesting, for example, in terms of cancer here, that for stomach cancer, first of all, this is a study on Japanese migrants to Hawaii, where they could follow the people in terms of the Japanese originally in Japan, the first generation migrants, the second generation, and the Caucasian Hawaiians, and the blue ones here. And you see very clearly here, for example, stomach cancer, which is traditionally very high in Japan, This is the Japan rate, 80 per 100,000. When you follow that, the stomach cancer rate in migrants and their descendants in Hawaii, they are going to approach the lower rates that are already there in Caucasian Hawaiians, as indicative of our Western populations. Well, conversely, for breast cancer, the opposite is true. Low rates in Japan traditionally, and very high rates in Western world, and the Japanese are adapting to their new host countries and take over the new rates. So these are very big changes. For example, from here, from 10 to 100,000 to more than 80, an eightfold difference. And this is approaching that in several generations. So this shows that because people adopt more the lifestyle of their new country, this is apparently important in the genesis of those cancers. And in fact, it shows here also that it will take for some cancer quite a while before that becomes apparent. So there's already some effect in the first generation, but a further effect in the second generation, which means that there are factors operating early and later in the genesis of a cancer, which can, as you hopefully know, take some 20 to 40 years to occur. And another pattern is, for example, colon cancer, where you see already very clearly in the first generation migrants, so the ones that went, they already adopted the new rates of their host country, while this is the original Japan rate, which means that apparently there are some factors operating later on in the carcinogenesis process, lifestyle factors, and by changing those factors, they already can take up the rates of their new host country. So this shows that there is big variation, and in fact, these three pieces of evidence, so that the rates of cardiovascular disease and major cancers differ 5 to 100-fold between various populations on one hand, that there can over time be dramatic changes in disease rates, which we witness in fact all the time. Now heart disease is going down, for example, primarily because smoking is going down. And also these migrant studies from low to high risk countries or vice versa, you almost always see that their rates will change to those of the new country. And that is why it is thought that the role of genetics is less important in the occurrence and the genesis of those major causes of death, and that environmental factors are responsible for some 80 to 90% of it. Here are some examples for different diseases, some estimates. So percentage of major diseases in the US avoidable by lifestyle modification. Colon cancer, we thought that some 70% of colon cancer is avoidable by changing lifestyle. And for stroke similarly, and for coronary heart disease and type 2 diabetes even higher. And it's also, of course, quite logical that now that we witness these epidemics of obesity or diabetes or whatever, it is hard to imagine that that can be very much due to our genetic constitution, because that is so stable. Here are some other estimates of some particular cancers. This is from New England Journal of Medicine 2000, on the proportion for different cancers due to heritable factors or environmental factors. So it can, again, vary a lot by different cancers. This is a study based on twins. So it has another design, and these percentages are not always exactly comparable to the ones that I showed you here. But for example, here you see that while lung cancer is thought that at least 74% is due to environmental factors, 26% to heritable. For colorectal cancer, there's thought that some more is due to heritable factors. For example, for cervix uteri, everything is due to environmental factors, namely infection. Okay, what are the lifestyle factors that I will concentrate now on further? Having, I think, shown that environment and lifestyle are important. We'll go and talk a little bit about tobacco smoking, then go into alcohol drinking, physical activity, body weight, and dietary factors. So first of all, smoking. Well, this is a picture showing, maybe not even complete list, but trying to be rather complete on the health consequences that have been causally linked to smoking, active and passive smoking. This is from the Surgeon General in the United States. And here you see, for example, smoking, so active smoking, here passive smoking, here cancers, other chronic diseases, and here the effects in children, and here in adults of second-hand smoke. Well, a whole bunch of cancers are attributable to certain or a large part to smoking, varying from head and neck tumors, esophageal cancer, of course lung cancer, stomach, pancreas, kidney, etc. Bladder cancer certainly worthwhile to mention. And there's here a whole host of other diseases, to begin with stroke, but also coronary heart disease, cataract, etc. And there are, again, also a number of other consequences that have been in studies causally linked to passive smoking. So, of course, in fact, the most important lifestyle factor determining our health at the moment. This is another graph showing that on an age-specific basis, you can see here the excess death rate for male smokers for various diseases. So the excess death rate meaning the excess rate that smokers have compared to non-smokers. Because everybody, of course, can have a certain risk of one of these diseases. And you see here for lung cancer, coronary heart disease, COPD, cerebrovascular disease, that this, of course, goes up with age because of the cumulative effect of smoking. But it depends on the disease how this excess rate looks like. For example, there's a difference here between coronary heart disease and lung cancer in terms of the pattern when they occur and how early. Some are diseases of more older age and some already clearly at middle age beginning to appear. Then there's here a couple of other data on where these causal relationships in terms of epidemiology are based on. There's also a lot of experimental work in animal studies, etc., supporting this. But this is, for example, a graph showing you the relative risk of coronary heart disease for smokers versus non-smokers, where you have here in a first crude analysis the separation in never smoked, 1 to 14 cigarettes per day, 14 to 15 or more, and here the relative risk of coronary heart disease compared to this never smoker category. I suppose everybody knows about relative risks and odds ratios, etc., and attributable risks that you've all been explained in earlier classes. These concepts. Yeah, I don't see anyone saying no, so I assume that. So very clear, strong, as we say, positive association and the relative risk of male smokers that smoke 15 or more cigarettes a day is 5.5 compared to people that never smoke. And for lung cancer, it's about 10 at least. If you smoke a lot more, then it can be even higher. And here are some slides showing you what kind of mechanisms that are thought behind the effect of cigarette smoking in causing acute cardiovascular events. And then you can think about, of course, the different components of tobacco and smoke, thinking of carbon monoxide, nicotine here, and other particulates, etc., and oxygen chemicals. So there is, well, first of all, here vasoconstriction is very important, determined by effects of nicotine on the nervous system. Then there's here inflammation mentioned, and leading to reduced blood supply, myocardial blood supply, and occlusion, and therefore in the end leading to ischemia and also sudden death. This has been worked out quite well, and this is just an initial graph, can be, of course, more elaborated. Here some data on the smoking and lung cancer, but then not so much the I think, well-known association that is a lot stronger than we saw already for heart disease, but here that there is still hope for people that stop at a certain age. That might also be good to keep in mind if you do not know it. Some people say, well, it has no use at all to once you smoke to stop. Well, it certainly has use, and here are some data saying what would be the effect, or what is the effect if you stop at a certain age. So here you have a comparison. This is again the risk of lung cancer, in fact the mortality of lung cancer over age for continuous cigarette smokers, so the people that keep on smoking. This is the risk for lifelong non-smokers. You see first of all the enormous difference in those two. And then here you see what is the risk of lung cancer over time. If you stop, for example, early, at age 30, or stop at age 60, which is rather late. And then still you have already a reduced risk compared to the people that keep on smoking. And this is for lung cancer, you see this, but it's also been seen for other cancers and but also other diseases. So this is a little bit different graph, but also on the, in fact, the cessation of smoking, stopping of smoking. And what is the mortality of certain diseases related to the time since cessation? This is from Cancer Prevention Study, American Cohort Study from the American Cancer Society, but they've been looking at lung cancer mortality, for example, COPD mortality, and cardiovascular mortality relative risk. And this is then here from the x-axis you see all the time since cessation. This is, by the way, for males and females. So roughly speaking, the effect of cessation is the same in men and women. It depends a little bit on the disease, but overall you see a clear downward pattern with a longer time since cessation. And it in fact shows also, of course, that this has to do with the latency time of all of those diseases. And we know that cancer has a lot longer latency period than, for example, cardiovascular disease. And therefore you would expect that if you stop with smoking, then you would see an earlier effect of that than on cardiovascular disease than for cancer. And that is also what you see here. So again, here's time since cessation. Here's, for example, for cardiovascular disease, this risk is already not very high to begin with, but it's above 2, and it starts decreasing quite rapidly, and it's very close to 1 already, let's say, after 10 years of cessation. Well, here, for lung cancer, this period takes a lot longer, and you're talking here about relative risk of 5 still, once for example, people that have stopped 15 years ago. But it will go down very close to this famous value of 1 as well. It's a very long time since stopping. And then for COPD, there's something similar. So there's for all diseases a clear effect of stopping smoking. And for some diseases, this effect is seen earlier than for others. And that is why I think cardiovascular disease, which was for a long time the #1 cause of death in the world, is now the second cause, because we have been, of course, successful, at least in Europe, I think a lot less than in the US, but with stopping smoking. And the first effect that you will see on the population level, given these latency periods, is therefore on cardiovascular disease. And we already, as I showed you, see also that the lung cancer epidemic in men is going down, but this effect is clearly later than the cardiovascular disease epidemic, which is also caused by some other factors. But don't forget that smoking is also a very, very important cause for cardiovascular disease. No matter what other factors are all mentioned, but smoking is, in fact, maybe the prime factor. And that's why we see this. In fact, what people have mentioned and suggested is a good thing to think in terms of tobacco epidemics. Like we have disease epidemics, you can also think about this epidemic. Because of course, you can think about the sales of cigarettes and the smoking habits, etc. And the interesting thing here is that there can be, given the consumption of cigarettes by people, that it changes all the time. You can think about an epidemic of that. The interesting thing here is that the different countries are in different so-called stages of that epidemic. So here is the percentage of smokers among adults given, and here is the percentage of deaths caused by smoking given for different categories. And then here is also something on these countries. So first of all, these graphs on the epidemic itself. For example, let's start with the male smokers. They have started in our societies early with taking up of the habits, but it's going down now, so that's this green line. If you see this type of line, I don't know how you say that in English, let's say striped line or something, this is the percentage of male death, which is following this same epidemic of the tobacco, but let's say some 20 to 40 years later. Again, given the latency periods of the diseases caused by smoking. Same is true for females, where they've taken up this habit later, and also their death pattern is now on the rise, therefore. So that's a general epidemic, and let's look now at this part here. It is, if you think about, let's say, the different stages, this is just in years from 0 to 100, for example, 4 stages. Then the Western countries, Western Europe and US and Australia, etc., are in this stage of the tobacco epidemic. While Southern Europe and Eastern Europe are more still in this stage. And China and other Asian countries are very much in this stage where, as I said, the tobacco industry has been well, exporting everything since it was stopped here. And then there is still sub-Saharan Africa to go for. So this is, I think an interesting idea how you can look at this tobacco and its influence on disease, and in which stage of this epidemic different countries or continents are. Okay, conclusions about smoking. Closely related to a range of chronic diseases, as I have shown you. On which there are many cancer types, but also cardiovascular diseases, for instance, certainly also respiratory diseases. More than 19 diseases have been linked to this lifestyle factor. There are also perinatal conditions linked to smoking, of course. There are mechanisms that have been put forward involving various pathways of benefit disease. There are clear dose-response relationships. I think I've shown you that timing is important, and there is substantial risk reduction possible after cessation. Then another time trend. This is on the obesity. You could also look at it on the opposite trend on televisions. We have been successful in making flat screens, but there is another epidemic, another time trend opposite to that. So obesity, yeah. I can show you many graphs on what we know about how obesity, of course, is on the rise in different countries in Europe, but as everybody knows, the US is, in many aspects, our, let's say, country and miracle country where we often look at. So they're certainly also ahead of us in this respect, and just to give you some idea about the distribution of overweight and obesity in the different states of the United States in 1990, 10 years later, and again 10 years later by the Centers of Disease Control, they produced these graphs. So this is, in fact, the percentage of people that are obese and not overweight, so BMI over 30. And here are some the colors indicating that. So, for example, this light blue is less than 10%, and this one here, this brown and red one, is more than 30%. So, in the 1990s, when we may already think that the Americans were heavy already, well, they were, but they were still on this side. But if you look at the different time periods, you see that in all of the country, but certainly in the southeastern part, obesity is very, very much on the rise. And it's about, I think, 60 or 70% of the Americans are now overweight or obese. And Europeans are lagging behind, but we're trying to catch up, as you can witness every day on the street. How is obesity linked to disease? Well, there are of course many things that can be said to it, but I will look at it only from an epidemiological point of view and in different types of diseases. First of all, you can look at total mortality. And here's an analysis published in The Lancet in 2009. maybe not terribly clear because this graph is clear, but here is for men and women. So men is the top line and women here. The risk of the relative risk of the risk of mortality, and then here according to the different BMI categories. And this is the line indicating 25, which is, as you I think know, the difference between normal weight and overweight. And here we have the 30, and this is going up to 40 here, and this is 20 to 25 is the normal weight, and then below that is underweight. And you see here that the lowest risk of mortality, total mortality, in men and women is observed indeed in this normal weight category, somewhere a little bit lower than 25. But you see here clearly not a linear relationship, but more a U-shaped relationship, or J-shaped actually, for men and women. And the risks in men are overall higher than in women. And this is true for total mortality, but generally said also true for some other diseases. Also, again, difficult to read, but here this is supposed to be a red line, and it's vascular disease here. So this is for men again, and this is for women, which again shows this J-shape, very high risk for very heavy people, but let's say optimal weight somewhere between 20 and 25. Let's have a look. This is the first. Well, these are different lines for different cancers. So for cancers, it's not always clear that there's the same relationship between overweight and that cancer. I will talk about that in a minute. And this is, for example, the relationship for respiratory disease. So it depends on the disease where you're talking about how this relationship with overweight and obesity is. And here are some data on cancer and the different cancers. This is on cancer incidence, and this is the slide for men. I'll show you on women. This is a meta-analysis on the BMI and the risk of certain cancers here. And to give you an idea, and this is in fact ranked according to the relative risk that came out of that meta-analysis. So you see here that for quite a number of cancers there is indeed a positive association. So for people this is a risk ratio, by the way, per 5 kilograms per square meter increase. So this is based on a continuous analysis, but it's indicating that heavier people have more risk. So positive associations have been observed for quite a number of cancers. This is, for example, relative risk of 1.5, but here it's for esophageal adenocarcinoma, and also for colon cancer, renal cancer, liver cancer, etc. But also some cancers that are in fact inversely related to weight, to body weight. For example, lung cancer, significant inverse association, and interestingly also esophageal cancer, but now the squamous one. Esophageal cancer is a very interesting cancer to study because it used to be a rather rare cancer. As you may know, it's a very deadly cancer. Its prognosis is as bad or even worse as lung cancer. But it used to be rare, and it's classically known that it's caused by smoking and alcohol. In this case, almost 90% of esophageal squamous cell cancer is attributable to smoking and alcohol. The interesting thing is that it used always to be this type, squamous cell carcinoma. Well, interestingly, in the last 3 decades, there's another type, esophageal adenocarcinoma, which is more on the lower side of the esophagus. That is on the rise. This one has increased 6-fold in the US in the last 30 years, and it is as deadly as this one. And in fact, this type of cancer is not caused by smoking and alcohol, but it's certainly thought that obesity is very important here. And there are some interesting other studies showing that precursor lesions like Barrett esophagus that are also underscoring this. So interesting that for this one particular cancer, both types are on the wide end of the spectrum. This is was the situation for men, this is for women. Also these esophaguses are high here and the squamous on this side here. But here, for women, in fact, the risk, the association with endometrial cancer is the strongest. That is the cancer determined in the strongest way by Oakaway. But again, a number of cancers positively related. And also there are a number of cancers in men and women that are not related to Oakaway. How can this work? Well, this is a slide showing what we know about that, or what has been suggested, because it has not all been worked out that well. But generally it's also, here's obesity, and here is, let's say, cancer and different effects here. That there are a number of pathways involved in that. But insulin resistance and glucose, etc., but also hormones for cancer are thought to be quite important. So obesity has a number of effects. For example, it leads to an increase in estradiol production, and also to its effect on the liver. There is actually less production of so-called sex hormone binding globulins, so the proteins that can bind these hormones. And because that is going down, in fact, the availability, so the level of bioactive estradiol is increased by obesity. And that, sometimes in combination with increased insulin, in fact leads to a so-called mitogenic situation. So a situation where cells are stimulated into mitogenesis and proliferation. And the idea for cancer in general is that once cells are in that situation, they are more vulnerable to other kinds of insults. Cells that are in relative rest, that are not dividing a lot, etc., they are relatively protected, it's thought. Well, any stimulus in terms of mitogenesis, which is, for example, through obesity, but also through alcohol, can lead to this situation. And combined with a number of other possible mechanisms like DNA damage mutagenesis, this is thought that how obesity can contribute to this increased cancer risk. Then back to, for example, other diseases, for example, heart disease here. On one hand, we can talk about BMI, overweight and obesity in general, but as you know, we can also look at other aspects. So, for example, the waist-hip ratio is given here. So here is general versus so-called abdominal obesity in relation to coronary heart disease risk. This is a three-dimensional graph where if this is the reference category, you see how the relative risk of coronary heart disease changes with changing BMI categories and in combination also with waist-hip ratio categories. So there's an increase of this risk with all BMI categories, but it's especially strong if there's also abdominal obesity. And abdominal obesity is also already important even for the people that are on the, let's say, good side of the BMI equation. There already you also see this increased risk. And it's every now and then good to know how our lifestyle indeed is. Which is what is important in, of course, obesity is just a mirror of our, in fact, positive energy balance. By our consumption and our activity patterns, etc., most of us are in positive energy balance. And we consume a lot. Overnutrition is thought to be very important in fact in terms of the risk of many of these diseases, heart disease, cancer. This is a picture showing, that's interesting, I think a photographer has been going around the world and trying to envisage what a family in certain countries eats over a week. So this is the food that is available to this 13-member family in Bhutan in Asia. To give you an idea. Without going into the products, this is what is a German family consumes during the week. German family of 4. So quite a difference. And it's overnutrition nutrition, as I said, of which obesity is an indicator of, is quite important in determining risks. So have a look again and with these 13 members, and here the 4th German member. And this could be true for Belgium, for Holland, and for the United States, of course. And in fact, energy restriction is thought to be very important. So energy intake restriction is thought to be important, and this is very much supported by animal experiments as well. I mean, there's meta-analysis on animal experiments that have been done in mice, for example, where energy restricted versus fat mice were compared. And this already, the oldest studies are from the 1940s, but every now and then some pop up. But very clearly, with maybe one exception, all indicate that this is for breast cancer incidence, but for a number of other diseases as well, there is a clear protective effect of energy restriction. In fact, the opposite of overnutrition. And it's quite strong. It's less, so the relative risk, as we estimate, is less than 0.5. So 50% reduction has been reached in these, of course, mice that have been restricted, and they live longer, etc. They're not starved, whatever. No, they're, for example, on a 70% restricted diet versus an athlete diet. But yeah, it's not easy to imagine how we could do these kind of experiments in our human situation. Therefore, we have been looking at obesity and some other particular situations as well. But again, this is a point supported by animal evidence and by human evidence. Now, the other side of the energy balance is, of course, the physical activity of people, another lifestyle factor. This is a meta-analysis on physical activity and total mortality. This is here the activity of the non-vigorous physical activity expressed in net hours per week. And you see here a very nice and clear downward trend in the risk of total mortality, depending on the activity level. And you can imagine this is non-vigorous activity. Once you have more vigorous activity, the effect is even stronger. But many studies indicated that this is important. The effect on physical activity is certainly important in determining a number of these diseases. This is, for example, coronary heart disease. We've also observed it for some cancers, but the evidence for coronary heart disease is stronger here. Physical activity, and then in combination with, in fact, abdominal obesity here, you can of course also look at combinations of that, and then related to the coronary heart disease risk of people. So here, the reference category is over here, people that are quite active, very active, and have no abdominal obesity. If we take those as a reference category, you see, for example, on one hand, that when people are less active, there's an increased risk in all of those categories, but also in the ones that are not abdominal obese. And here is the effect of abdominal obesity within categories of physical activity, and here you see a combined effect. So, of course, these are two aspects of our energy balance, important in determining our coronary heart disease. Very recently, actually last week, and therefore I don't know if this publication will be still in this year or next year, the Lancet is now online. People have been studying, because I think you know that statins are a success story in coronary heart disease. But people have been looking at also combinations. So here's physical activity, statin use, and total mortality in a veterans study in the United States, dyslipidemic veterans cohort, where people could of course look at the effect of statins on mortality, but also on physical activity and the combination. So here you see, for example, let's start here. For people, the veterans that didn't use statins, you see here this gradient in risk. For more activity, lower risk of total mortality. And the same is true for the statin users, but even within statin users, there is this downward, this inverse trend with increasing physical activity. And of course, statin use also had the effect. You see that these are all lower than in this group already. But it's in some sense, the effect of physical activity is comparable to statin use. This publication will come out very soon, I suppose. How about physical activity and risk of cancer? This is a summary slide showing that there is, from the WCRF, World Cancer Research Fund, that has, if you're interested, published a very big report in 2007 on diet and lifestyle and cancer. There is convincing evidence that physical activity decreases the risk of colon cancer. Probable evidence that postmenopausal breast cancer and endometrial cancer have decreased risk by physical activity. And there's limited evidence for physical activity and lung cancer, pancreas, or premenopausal breast cancer. So I would say, as usual, the evidence for the different cancers can vary because they're in fact quite different diseases. Here is some information on how physical activity is thought to determine cancer risk or prognosis. So here's the physical activity, which of course can have an effect on reduced adiposity or decreased insulin levels and glucose levels. And also it's thought that there can be an effect on the hormones again, all leading to decreased risk of cancer. Very crude slide. And then time for something else. So alcohol, also clearly a lifestyle factor. Alcohol is very interesting for these various diseases because of sometimes differing effects on different diseases. So here there have been studies done earlier, but this was one of the first studies that actually summarized within, again, American Cancer Society cohort study, the effect of alcohol on different diseases. This is mortality of different diseases. And this is alcohol expressed in drinks per day. So 0 occasional drinkers, that's how they define it, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus. And you see here the mortality due to different diseases. So first of all, you see this, that this is a relative risk of 1. That coronary heart disease has an inverse association with alcohol consumption over quite a range of alcohol consumption. And it's going up here, but for quite a long time it stays in this range. Now for most other diseases, the rise is much earlier, but there seems to be, let's say, an optimal, or the minimal risk is not exactly at the people that drink nothing, but that drink either occasionally or 1 drink per day. And this is for, the red line is for all causes, where you see this. For cancer, all cancers together, then the rise in risk is already taking up earlier, and of course cancer and heart disease determine a lot of these all causes line. You see here for cerebrovascular disease also goes up very early already, and then accidents is given as well. This is a graph very detailed, but just saying that it has been looked at for various cancers, where also based on a meta-analysis in 2001, where generally speaking you can make a distinction on upper digestive tract cancer, so head and neck cancer, etc., but also esophageal cancer. Clear positive association out of these meta-analysis with increasing alcohol intake. Very strong association. Then the lower digestive tract, where there's also positive association, but less strong. Then there are other neoplasms with varying results. For example, female breast cancer has been clearly associated with alcohol consumption. The risk is not as strong as for other cancers, but it's a clear association. But for example, for endometrial cancer, there is almost no association. Ovarian cancer shows a positive association. And then for prostate, lung, and pancreas, the evidence is not very clear. How can alcohol affect our carcinogenesis? Well, this is a slide depicting that, how that would work. So here you have ethanol, alcohol, And here again, because I should say that there has been a lot of studies on alcohol, alcoholic drinks, and cancer, and also heart disease, which I'll mention in a minute. But the point with cancer research was always, yeah, is this an effect, this increased risk effect of alcohol? Is this due to alcohol, or is it due to contaminants in drinks? For example, in liquors or whatever. Well, the end of that is that it has been rather settled that ethanol, the important component, is in fact the important component driving this risk, and not the contaminants. In very special situations it is. It has always been mentioned that the ones in Western France where they drink this Calvados, etc., they have a particularly high risk, but it's in fact due to their alcohol consumption, which goes along with drinking a lot of alcohols and not so much contaminants. I don't say that, let's say, in some other countries, in other continents, there can be very special situations, but generally it's thought that ethanol is important in determining this cancer risk. And why is that? Well, ethanol is metabolized in our body by alcohol dehydrogenase into acetaldehyde. And ethanol is considered, or actually acetaldehyde, is a carcinogen in animal experiments. So we metabolize our alcohol all the time to acetaldehyde, and then this is either further converted to, let's say, in the end to CO2 and water, or it's metabolized into fat. But the acetaldehyde can act on various stages of carcinogenesis, depicted here from a healthy cell to initiated cell to a tumor cell. I suppose you know about initiation and promotion. I haven't even bothered to tell you about that because I think you have had a class on carcinogenesis. So that's why it's thought that acetaldehyde has this effect on different stages of the carcinogenesis process. Here are some other factors mentioned as well. It can also lead to older methylation, for example, DNA hypermethylation, and also contribute in that way. And furthermore, ethanol can act as a solvent for other carcinogens that people happen to ingest or that they create in their body from pro-carcinogens. One of the most important ones is the carcinogens that people take by smoking. And so alcohol can help the smoking carcinogens involved by acting as a solvent and in fact increasing permeability of membranes to other carcinogens. So it can act through various ways. Now, importantly here is this enzyme, because there have been several studies in cancer, but also heart disease, on this and genetic polymorphisms. So this ADH, alcohol dehydrogenase, there are in fact two important forms, ADH2 and 3. But the ADH2 are rather rare in Caucasians, polymorphisms. And the ADH3 one allele, that is in fact indicating the more rapid alcohol metabolizers, so that metabolizes rapidly into acetaldehyde. That occurs in 58% of European white people. And if you have this one genotype, so therefore you have this increased acetaldehyde, and therefore, for example, have an increased risk of these head and neck tumors, and also of liver cirrhosis and pancreatitis. So supporting the idea that indeed the alcohol, through this effect in the rapid metabolizers, shows this. Now, the other side of it, this has also been studied in heart disease, where, as I showed you, alcohol has an inverse association. And people have studied also the alcohol relationship with myocardial infarction according to ADH3 genotype. And that's what you see here. So here you see from a study in the New England Journal, people separated in drinking very little, less than 1 drink a day, or 1 drink a day or more. And you see here the effect of drinking on, first of all, HDL cholesterol, and here the relative risk of myocardial infarction. And then separated by the genotype, so the fast metabolizers, intermediate, and slow metabolizers. So again, the metabolizers, that metabolizes from alcohol to acetaldehyde. And the effect of alcohol on coronary heart disease is thought to go through HDL. And that is also what you see here, because for people that drink 1 drink or more per day, you see that indeed for the slow metabolizers, so that contain that relatively long peak in alcohol in the body, then the HDL levels are indeed higher, HDL cholesterol levels, than in the ones that metabolize it fast. And correspondingly, you see also that the risk of heart disease, of myocardial infarction, is a lot lower here in the slow metabolizers than in the fast metabolizers. Again, underscoring the effect of alcohol through HDL cholesterol, because that is thought to be the main pathway how alcohol is giving this protective effect. There are also some separate effects, but these data underscore them. Okay, again, it's also good here to look at total mortality, and this is a meta-analysis published in 2006, where you see for men and women, based on a lot of cohort studies, the relationship between alcohol consumption and total mortality. And then here in drinks per day, you can have a look in either grams of alcohol per day or drinks per day, because it's generally assumed that, at least in Europe, one drink contains 10 grams of alcohol. So one glass of beer, or one glass of wine, or one glass of liquor contains on average 10 grams of alcohol. So look at your favorite consumption level and have a look at the chance of mortality. Because here again you see this J shape for both men and women, but also you see that for women it's on the risk is rising with earlier consumption, as we know, because the metabolism in women is somewhat different than in men. Here's these lines with the 99% confidence intervals along that way. So for women, the range, let's say, of low risk is on the lower side here than for men. In fact, the actual minima are very close to each other. Okay, so that's about alcohol, clearly associated with a number of these diseases, but depending on the disease where you're talking about, opposite effects. Then on diet, last couple of words. This is diet and coronary heart disease. What do we know about that? So there's evidence for causal relationship, strong evidence, moderate or insufficient evidence. Well, there's strong evidence that vegetable intake, nuts, and monounsaturated fatty acids and the Mediterranean diet have a clear association or relationship with coronary heart disease in a protected way. And in fact, the Mediterranean diet has sometimes also been tested in randomized controlled trials. So this is not only based on cohort studies or patient control studies. On the other side, harmful effect causally related to coronary heart disease, trans fatty acid intake and foods with high glycemic index or low. So after all kinds of studies on fat and what have you, because total fat was always thought to be very important in terms of saturated fat for coronary heart disease, but in fact it boils down to that now these trans fatty acids are the very important ones determining risk. And the monounsaturated fats are not protected side. There's moderate evidence for a whole bunch of other factors: food, alcohol, fiber, fish. A lot of these omega-3 stuff that has been commercially invented all the time, but in fact the evidence is not as strong, even for heart disease, as people would like to think, let alone for all kinds of other diseases. It's on the moderate side, and there's insufficient evidence for it. Here you have total fat, saturated fat, etc. And here there's a table indicating what we know about diet and cancer risk, again in convincing, probable, and insufficient diet or associated factors. So we talked about overweight and obesity, increased risk convincingly. Alcohol also, and there's aflatoxin and Chinese-style salted fish. Aflatoxin, one of the mycotoxins, as you might know, it's very potent carcinogen for liver cancer. And physical activity is here on the convincing side of the decreased risk. There's probably a relationship with fruits and vegetables with a number of cancers, physical activity, breast cancer. And here is red meat and preserved meat, which also receives a lot of attention, which is probably related to colon cancer. And here's a bunch of other factors in the insufficient range. Okay, a lot of the work that has been done is on fruits and vegetables and the components behind that, because they might be important for both heart disease and cancer, for example. And after a lot of studies, observational studies have been done, people decided in fact in the 1980s, in the last centuries, to set up a trial, and the first one was the ATTC trial, alpha tocopherol beta-carotene cancer prevention study, also known as the Finnish lung cancer trial. This trial was going to investigate whether indeed supplementation with either beta-carotene or vitamin E would decrease the risk of lung cancer and maybe also other diseases, but it was primarily aimed at lung cancer. It's a primary prevention trial, randomized placebo-controlled trial, and it was done among 29,000 smokers in Finland. The follow-up was 6 years, and 876 incident cases of lung cancer were found in that period. And much to the astonishment of the investigators and the world, the effect of beta-carotene suppletion was not that it would protect against lung cancer, but there was actually increased risk in the people that got supplemented, and significantly increased. Published in New England Journal of 1994. This is how the graphs look like. This is the incidence of lung cancer in percentage and then over years of follow-up. It shows that for the beta-carotene supplied or no beta-carotene, how these graphs look like. You see that although in the beginning, indeed, the beta-carotene supplemented people had a low risk of lung cancer, in the longer run, after longer supplementation, it was clearly the other way around, and it's diverting, so that people indeed got supplemented. The beta-carotene have a higher lung cancer risk. It also shows the danger of concentrating on very short-term RCTs in this respect. Also for heart disease, similar pattern. This was not the primary endpoint, that was lung cancer, but also there you see that beta-carotene supplementation led to a higher rate of coronary heart disease in this trial over time. So there are also some other trials, and for example the CARET trial in the United States, in the western United States, also showed this effect more or less at the same time. So there was a big discussion afterwards about how could this be and how beta-carotene then could have this effect. Because it was also at that time always said, based on many animal work and in vitro work, how nicely and the mechanisms of beta-carotene would fit in protection against these diseases. Anyway, these trials gave room for other investigations, and within this trial they also did some extra analysis. So this is a trial where they supplemented either with carotene or retinol talipate. They looked also at lung cancer. That's about 14,000 men. And they here also looked at an analysis stratified by treatment arm, by intervention or placebo. And it turns out that in that trial, when they separated people and do analysis on the intake of fruit and vegetables of those people, that usual intake related to lung cancer risk, but then within the intervention or placebo group, they only found that inverse effect in the placebo arm. So here's the relative risk of lung cancer by quintile of intake of, for example, total fruit and cruciferide, particular vegetable here. And here then for the ones that got the placebo treatment or that were that got the intervention by beta-carotene here. And you see here that the ones that didn't get the supplement, they showed indeed having in relationship with fruit intake and lung cancer incidence a very significant trend, while the trend is not significant anymore in the intervention group. And the same is true here for this cruciferide, significant trend in the placebo group, but intervening by this variable apparently gives, well, not a good effect. So we can say that the chemo prevention by this so-called single nutritional factors are unsuccessful. But it's clearly shown here that is apparently it's true that the vitamin supplements may in fact diminish the effects of fruits and vegetables. Also, of course, depends on what is your normal intake. So there have been a number of these trials now with single nutritional factors, and in fact, in they're rather unsuccessful, both for cancer and cardiovascular disease. And foods are, of course, very complex combinations of nutrients, one food, but certainly also you can think about patterns. So we still have a long way to go to identify either the foods or the nutrients that are behind these associations. And people are now a little bit more looking into patterns of food and think about healthy patterns. For example, the Mediterranean diet got a lot of attention in the last couple of years. This is a picture depicting how you could envisage that and think about the Mediterranean and the diet. And it has been looked at in several cohort studies in relationship, for example, to cardiovascular disease mortality. There's an inverse association. People that adhere more to this type of diet have a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Same is true for cancer. The effect a little bit less strong, but very interesting that this diet could have this effect. And you do not only see it in studies done in Italy, but also, for example, studies done here or in Scandinavia. Not very Mediterranean, maybe. Here are some data on what we think that can be the so-called population attributable fractions or myocardial fractions due to these lifestyle factors. This is based on data in 52 countries. And you see here, for example, the population attributable fractions for tobacco, here for men and women, alcohol, fruits and vegetables, overweight, and physical exercise. As an estimate of what we've seen before, how you could estimate that influence on population level. And this is just for your reference, what is for total cancer, just estimated last year in the UK for the different lifestyle factors, but also some other environmental factors. Then a final word on this lifestyle and dietary pattern. There is increasing interest in this, as I said, in this pattern, but also, in fact, a combination of lifestyle factors. So there have been some studies that have been looking at a combination of smoking, exercise, overweight, diet, and alcohol in one study, instead of studying each of them separately. And what you, for example, can do is give scores to people depending on if they show healthy behavior for that factor or not. So, for example, give a 1 for healthy behavior and 0 for not. We've done that in our study that we do ourselves, the Netherlands cohort study on 120,000 men and women in the Netherlands. We had mortality follow-up data for 10 years available, and where we, with the measurement of all these lifestyle factors, attributed these scores to people. These are the scores and the categories for smoking, physical activity, BMI, and the Mediterranean diet adherence, including alcohol. So it's considered to be healthy based on all the earlier work. If people have never smoked or stopped more than 10 years ago, if they're physically active for more than 30 minutes a day, are in this BMI category and have a high adherence here, and then score 0 here. And then you can add these up and say, okay, I'll give a score to their combined lifestyle. That is what we've been doing, a combined added score for a healthy lifestyle, which, as you can gather, can range from 0 to 4. 0 with no healthy lifestyle at all, 4 maximally. And you can look at that in terms of hazard ratios, but also to another effect measures. First of all, here is for men and women. The people with the healthiest score and the most unhealthy score. If we take these people as a reference category, then men that have, here the least healthy score, so that they smoke, they are not active, are heavy, and do not adhere to this Mediterranean diet, have a 2.6 times higher risk to die than the people with the healthiest score. And for women, it's a lot stronger even, it's more than 4, and very strong trend in here as well. So strong association between this combined lifestyle score and mortality. Here you see some idea about population attributable risk due to these combination of factors. And here's some other thing. It's called the rate advancement period, and that's estimated to be 8 years or 15 years for men or women respectively. What does this express? This is actually using these hazard ratios. You can express this in terms of a sort of aging effect of these this unhealthy behavior, in terms of the number of years that people are likely to die earlier. So for men that show the least healthy lifestyle, they on average can die some 8 years earlier than the men that don't that have the healthiest lifestyle. And for women, this difference is even a lot larger. To depict that in a way here, which has been done for smoking, and you must realize that smoking has a strong effect on mortality, for example. You can also give lines for cigarette smokers or for non-smokers in terms of the percentage of survival. And on average, the smokers die some 10 years earlier than non-smokers. And this graph that I showed you, this weight advancement period, is also trying to estimate this period, which is quite big. And certainly for women, it's very big. So you can see a lot of the effect of when you combine lifestyle factors. Has also been done in England, for example. Here is then the same type of analysis, but now as survival curves. And you see here that the ones that have the least healthy behavior have a lot higher risk to die than the ones with the most healthy behavior. Conclusions, then I will stop. Non-communicable diseases are very important now. Also in developing countries, they are very much on the rise. So 63% of global deaths are due to these diseases at the moment. A large proportion of them is determined by the environment and lifestyle factors within that environment. A strong relationship with major disease categories. We see for many factors there is a dose-dependent relationship that has been shown. There are biological mechanisms also proven, shown, or suggested for many of these factors. And the idea is that if they are really causally related, then population attributable risks can actually vary from 50 to some 90% per disease that you talk about. And you also see from this last analysis that when you combine these lifestyles, it can really have a huge effect on premature death. We can also see this as an aging effect, which we now estimate to actually be maximum 15 years. Quite large. And of course, it's not only a question for developed countries anymore, but also for developed countries. And it has a lot of attention now from the United Nations what to do about it. That's what I wanted to tell. Thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, any further questions, thank you.